Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are tuning in from. If this is the first time we are meeting, my name is Wenlin. I'm a virtual yoga educator and mentor for yoga teacher trainers based in Turin, Italy, and I'm originally from Singapore. So today, as part of the weekly Art of Teaching Yoga episodes, I wanted to share a little bit more about theming, how you can begin as a new yoga teacher or yoga teacher trainee to begin to come and approach the idea of theming your classes. And also I'll share 3 places that you can get inspiration for incorporating themes in your classes. Right, so if you have any questions, if you have any ideas, feel free to pop them in the comment box. You can say hi, let me know where you're tuning in from. And I hope this will be a useful session for you. All right, so let's begin. So with regards to theming your classes, right? So in most of the yoga teacher trainings, at least at the 200 hour, there may not be so much time to actually guide you, whether you're a certified yoga teacher or maybe you are still undergoing your training, with respect to theming. So there might be, perhaps you might be familiar with the Yoga Sutras, or perhaps you might have heard of the Bhagavad Gita, or some of the other yoga philosophy related texts. So of course these could be places where you could center your theme for your class on. And let me explain briefly what is a theme. A theme is a general idea or general thread that ties everything in together. So with respect to your yoga class, for example, things like how you invite the students into your class, right? What words you use to facilitate or to describe or to guide them into a specific movement, how you plan and you sequence the poses, all of these, right? If you have a central theme, ideally they should tie in back with that theme, right? Whatever that is. So the title of today's episode is The Secret to Theming, right? And I wanted to share a little bit more about a concept that is actually, in my opinion, the secret to theming, and why for me, I've managed to get really great feedback from my students, that they really enjoyed the classes and that they find it very beautiful and so on. And this is called bhavana. Right, and bhavana in Sanskrit, right, it actually means, I have the definition here, right? Bhava means to become, right? Ana means an instrument of, right? And defining bhavana, it's more of like understanding it as when you connect with a sense of bhavana, you become the instrument of something, you embody. So it is a way of saying embodiment, right? And what does embodiment mean? Embodiment means that you fully realize the idea, the concept, the feeling of whatever it is that you want to convey. So a bhavana can be an image, right? It could be a visualization, it could be a feeling, it could be a quality, it could be even an emotion, right? All of these are possible. And these can take inspiration from various different areas. And I'll talk a little bit more about them later on. But all of these, right, that are bhavana, right, how you actually use that to thread your class or to plan your class would be one possible way, right? Like that for me, usually I begin with an idea or feeling or visualization, or maybe some kind of, for example, image that I would like to convey. Maybe in my mind, I'm visualizing the idea or the image of water flowing down, right, or trickling, right, down, right, from a stream, following the path of least resistance. And that is my idea and what I want to share with people. But beyond just the surface of this image, how you use this image to then thread the rest of your class. Would it be a flowy class? Would it be a class in which you invite your students to connect with the element of water? What does it mean to be water? Right, so recently I taught a class that's focused on the theme of water and the element of water, which is found in the 5 elements that are in Ayurveda, in yoga, as well as the 5 elements in traditional Chinese medicine. So some similarities there. And just using the example of this water, right, and I themed it called like following the path of least resistance, because If you know water, if you have ever seen, for example, water is pretty fluid, right? It takes up the shape of any container that it is in. For example, here you can see the water is very fluid, it's taking up this shape in this bottle. But at the same time, even though it keeps the qualities of fluidity, adaptability, and flexibility, it is also very strong, right? You may not see it here, but for example, it is very heavy. Right, you can feel that here together, all the droplets of water has become something very heavy. And in addition, if you observe, right, the areas that have been touched by water, right, along the path of streams, rivers, waterfalls, all the rocks that are around those areas that have been touched by water, all their surfaces are smooth. And this is with the erosion, right, from the erosion of water over time. So what really, even though I began with the idea of the bhavana or the visualization of following the path of least resistance, right, flowing like water, what I wanted to convey at a deeper layer, at even further kind of deeper understanding to whoever was participating in my class, my intention was for them to understand that we too, in our movements, in our words, in our actions, and even in our relationships, can find that balance between fluidity and also adaptability, as well as strength, as well as courage, as well as saying or doing the things that sometimes might be difficult, might be seen as forceful, right? So this is that balance. And furthermore, following the path of least resistance means not efforting in the right way, because if you see water, right, it never really takes the path that is necessarily obstructing it, right? It follows the path that flows, and it adapts and it moves, going according to how, whatever life, whatever path it is moving towards. And this is what I wanted to invite whoever was in my class that day to experience as well. When you're flowing, right? Feel the flow. Feel that as you engage, for example, your muscles in a certain pose, maybe in Warrior 2, you feel that engagement using your breath on inhale, and then as you exhale, you release any unnecessary tension in other parts of your body, so that you're not resisting or you're not trashing around unnecessarily. All right, you only use your effort for what is needed. And this can also be tied in with various other concepts, like for example in the yamas, which are the restraints, right, under the first limb of yoga, right, under the 8 limbs of yoga, Raja Yoga, there's brahmacharya, which is often translated as celibacy or as being conserving your energy. But what it really means is to only effort as needed, right? Only effort on the things that matter. So you can see, if you begin with a general idea, then there are many different possibilities. It starts to branch out, and there are many different ways you can then convey this to whoever you want to guide on this path, right? And if you haven't tuned into the Art of Teaching Yoga webinar, right? If you're new to the group, in that webinar I alluded to the fact that most of the time we are called yoga instructors, but really we're not instructing, because my idea or my suggestion to you would be that we are merely guiding. We are providing a guidance, right, for people to explore their own path. And this comes from my studies with various teachers, and also within the recent interview with esteemed yoga expert and educator Bernie Clark. He mentions this as well, right? We are merely ground control. At the airport, we are supporting, right, our students, right, or our clients to fly their own aeroplanes. So this is what we're doing. So let me reiterate that again. Begin with bhavana, right? So that would be a central idea, a visualization, an image, something that you feel strongly about, right? Something that made you feel very moved, or maybe very angry, very sad, very gave you lots of inspiration, and you want to share this message, this idea, this visualization with more people, with your students, with your clients in class. So begin with that, and that can be your idea to branch off further, right? So that is really, in my opinion, the secret to theming. And how you can develop it further. So within the Art of Teaching Yoga webinar, I mentioned that there are actually 8 aspects to becoming a great yoga teacher, and many of these things, right, you may already be familiar with. For example, sequencing. If you were going to theme a class, let's say on, using my example that I talked about, the path of least resistance, how would you then guide your students through a sequence that lets them cultivate that sense of least resistance? Maybe you begin with some poses in which you get them to feel the resistance, and then on exhale, maybe you guide them to release the resistance. Right? Maybe you begin with poses that may feel more strong, and then later on you incorporate more fluid and flowy kind of sequences or movements or mudras as well, that evokes that feeling, that helps them feel it not just in the body but also in the mind. And then a few other ways, not just the sequencing, right, and also the actual poses that you use or whatever peak pose that you're moving towards, the words that you use, right? For example, if you were to describe the pose of warrior 2, right, instead of a strong warrior 2, you might encourage them to feel spacious and fluid and luscious, right, and expansive. So this is another tip, right? Underneath that bhavana, right, or the central idea, the central feeling, the image of whatever you want to evoke, understand that there are many different ways you can begin to sequence your class. You can begin to incorporate new poses. You can begin to describe and guide your students, your clients into these poses in new ways. So in your 200-hour yoga teacher training, maybe the way that you learned the alignment cues for warrior 2 was to step your foot out, 3 or 4 steps apart, turn your right foot out so that it is at a so and so angle towards your front foot, and bend your front knee. So that is what you learn, but that doesn't mean that you have to continue cueing in this way. There are many ways that we can use imagery, we can use language to facilitate the experience that people are feeling in their bodies, hearts, and their minds, right? You can use more descriptive language. You can ask them to visualize as you exhale, softening and melting the shoulders, maybe feeling like there's water running down, maybe a waterfall. Feel that as you exhale, visualizing that water running down, following the flow of gravity down towards the earth. So that would naturally change the experience of what looks like the same pose from the outside. Right, so this is another tip, and it all ties back into bhavana. So I know some of you, if you're tuning into the video, you may, for example, use music in your classes, right? The same goes with your music, right? If you use music in your classes, that is a very central element to it. I don't use music because most of my teachers that I've practiced under and trained under, they don't, and therefore that's just been my natural inclination. And also, firstly, before deciding, right, if you're not sure whether or not to use music, ask yourself, what is the intention of using music, right? Is it, because you've been used to it? Is it just merely habitual? Or is there a true intention you want to use this music to facilitate maybe the rise and fall? Much like telling a story, right? You have the beginning, and the introduction, you introduce the characters, they go on a journey, and then it reaches the climax, right? And then after the climax, there's this conflict, or maybe there's a resolution, and then it comes towards the end. So a really great yoga class might feel something like this, and you can achieve that using music, and music can help to facilitate that. This is why you want to use music, then you have to think about the order and the songs that you use. Are you going to use music with lyrics? If you use music with lyrics, do the lyrics resonate with the actual idea with the theme, with the visualization or the concept you want to share with people. Right? Like maybe the song is about flowing with water. Maybe the song or the music, right? Maybe it's not even with lyrics, it's instrumental, and you hear the sound of water dripping or the rain raining down, something like this. It could change the entire experience. So it becomes really like an art, right? When you use that music. And for those of you who don't use music, right, and maybe you've been used to not using music, right, like me, I would also ask you to be conscious about then when you're speaking and when you're not. Because when you speak, there has to be a purpose and an intention behind what you want to convey. There is a value in silence, in allowing people to experience and feel their bodies, the pose, the movement, the transition, the visualization in their mind, even in the pockets of silence that you allow them, right? Many of the very experienced or advanced teachers, their cues are very, very simple. So simple and so clear, yet crystal clear. And they leave a lot of silence, right? For whoever is experiencing, like I've trained, for example, with Donna Fahy. I've also practiced with Eleanor Criswell, Dr. Eleanor Criswell, who is the wife of Dr. Thomas Hanna, right? And various different styles and methods depending on, for example, which lineage you came from, as well as what type or style of yoga that you practice, but there is always a value of providing silence. So think about how you want to use silence, how you want to use your words, when you want to talk, how you want to talk, and if you want to use music, what kind of music, how are you going to sequence that music, and then also whether or not you include music with lyrics or not, and things like that. Okay, yeah, Rebecca, you said you remember water, right? To remember the power of persistence, right? Small movement over time has great impact, right? So even though tapas is fire, yeah, you think of water with that. Another thing I wanted to talk about with respect to bhavana, right? And also in the video, if you haven't caught it yet with Bernie Clark, I highly recommend you to catch that episode, is that as mentioned by Bernie, right? Us as teachers, we may have an intention for the class. So maybe my idea of like using the theme of the bhavana, which I may not tell my students explicitly, right? I may begin and say, oh, it's inspired by blah, blah, blah. Or I may not say it explicitly, and I may invite them to feel it using certain words, using certain poses. But to allow a little bit of freedom for students or your clients to interpret it according to how they would like, because everyone's experience is different. If you begin broad, right, and you say that today's class is sequenced based on or inspired by the element of water, right, and you just give a very general idea of what water might be and give them some directions as to how they want to explore and view this could be very different. So for example, Rebecca, you're saying that for you, it's more about the persistence, right? Because it's the trickles of water over time. In Chinese, there's this saying, 积少成多. When you accumulate, right, small things over time, it gets bigger and bigger, and this forms a river. One drop of water becomes a river. So that's actually quite different from the idea of, for example, following the path of least resistance. But it all ties in again with the element of water. So you can see the bhavana, right? It is a very huge and broad idea or concept, but with that concept, you can play around, you can theme a class, and if you allow your students to experience or to find their own meaning inside that class, inside their pose, it will be more valuable for them, because depending on whatever difficulties they're experiencing, challenges at work, at home, with their relationships and all that, they are able to then find something that is useful for them, that they can apply not just on the mat in that 1 hour, but also to life, right? When we bring bhavana, when we bring meaning and depth into the class, right? It changes and transforms a yoga class from a merely physical practice, which is, of course, I mean, not underplaying the physical benefits of yoga, but it's so much more really. Yoga, I mean, if we go back to the definition of yoga, it means union of the body and mind, union of you, me, right, with everyone else, with all the beings around. And at the end of the day, right, us as yoga teachers, I would like to think, and I invite you, right, to think as well, that we are not just like one yoga teacher that I am instructor. I'm very I often follow her work. She's called Naomi Epsilon. She likes to call some of this asana waitresses. So which means, you know, you just give out like descriptions, or you say, okay, what asana would you like to do today? And today maybe the students want to do headstand. Then you sequence a class on headstand. But what is the purpose of the headstand? Is there a goal behind it, right? Maybe actually why you want to teach the students headstand, and even if you don't want to, if they want to learn headstand, maybe you can guide them through something deeper, like overcoming their fear, changing their perspective in life, right? These are all great ways to tie in something that is more superficial, something that is more visceral, with something that is deep, that can be felt, that can be remembered. So even after 1 week, even after 1 month, maybe even 1 year, your students, your clients will remember, that class, you know, that I attended and I was going through this difficult time, or that day at work, you know, I had a really tough conversation with my colleagues or my boss, but I attended that class and I felt and I remembered in my heart and my mind this concept that I can apply not just on the mat, but also in life, right? So this is bhavana. Okay, so feel free to add in any comments if you have. Okay, I'm going to quickly talk about now 3 places to get inspired, right? Actually, there are many ways and many places you can get inspired, and I could probably do another episode just on that, but tying in with this and with the limited time we have, right? The first place I would advise, right, to you to get inspiration is not from like more reading or more research that you have to do. There's nothing else extra that you need to do. Find inspiration from what you have, your own life. So what did you eat today? What conversation did you have yesterday? What did you experience in your self-practice at home last night? What stories are you reading? Maybe you're an avid reader of fiction, right? What stories are you reading right now? You know, what is the plight of the protagonist in the book, right, that you are reading? All of these can become inspiration for, or ideas for bhavana for you. Right, for me, maybe say I'm working through a couple of different things, and right now I've just completed my somatic yoga professional. So I'm very focused on the idea of slow is the new fast. And I'm very interested in the idea of mindful release, right? Instead of focusing on the entry or the engagement, focusing on the release and the letting go, right? The undoing. So these could be all examples. So just taking an idea, taking something that is seemingly mundane or seemingly, you know, disconnected with your yoga class, with your students, play around with that. What have you been angry about? What have you been, you know, preoccupied? What has made you feel joyous? What has made you feel inspired? And let that be your bhavana. Like create and brainstorm an image, an idea, a concept around this, and then use that to form the theme of your class. Okay, so that's the first one. The first idea is you don't need to do anything. You already have everything you need to find. Oops. All right, there's someone upstairs who dropped something. Right. You already have everything you need to create and formulate different kinds of bhavana. And if you ever run out of ideas, look back to your 200-hour yoga teacher training. Or for example, if you have a day job, right? Or you have other commitments or other work, look into those. They can give you inspiration as well, right? The second place that you can get inspiration, right, it's kind of related to the first one, if you haven't already, is your own physical practice. If you don't already have like a regular self-practice, I would highly recommend you to begin one, and I'll talk about this in one of the later episodes as well, how to start establishing a home practice, and also, for example, dealing with things like how often should you do it, how long should you do it, and all that. Because only when you begin to move and you begin to practice, then that gives you the inspiration. It gives you the idea, when I move through this and this, from this shape to that shape, I feel this way in my body. And then from that real experience within your body, right, you can share it with others. You are able to, truly speak from personal experience, from a place of true knowledge, right? And I'll talk more about that in the later episode. So if you don't have that already, at least, for example, practice at a studio, go and find another yoga teacher or follow videos online, because through the act of practicing, it doesn't have to be asana, it could be meditation, it could be other forms of movement, as long as whatever makes you feel like, that is time for myself to unite my body and my mind, right? Then that, to me, is practice, right? So I was reading some information from a journal or a manual by a really great yoga teacher, very pretty old yoga teacher as well, veteran. He's called Eric Schiffman. He's a teacher of many great teachers as well. And what he said is, right, in the beginning, he was doing all these complex poses and, chasing after the next thing, because you feel that maybe, one thing after the other, and you want to advance, and you want to deepen your practice. But towards the end, what he found was that for his own practice, it began complicated, but it became simpler and simpler and simpler and simpler and simpler. And at the end, he barely does any asana at all. It is all very simple, just a few very simple poses. And the main reason why he does it is so that it can help him get into his body, so that then he can sit comfortably and turn into his mind in meditation, right? And I think that's a really beautiful metaphor, and also a very timely reminder. He also gives a great tip that when you're doing your self-practice, have a notebook handy, right? Because you never know when you're doing, right, something. I have lots of notebooks, right? So when you're doing either your meditation, right, your self-care practice, whether it's journaling, whether it is asana practice, whether it is free-form movement, you could be even dancing, doing sounding practice, mantra, mudra, for example. When you practice those, if something comes to you, a strong emotion, a strong feeling, an idea, inspiration, right, write it down. Because sometimes, you forget. I'm always thinking, okay, later on I'll be able to remember that. Sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, and then you miss it. You miss that insight. Maybe in that moment you're like, yes, I remembered this beautiful insight again. But after the practice, you forget. So that's another great tip from Eric Schiffman, and I would highly recommend you to do that, right? And the last way, right, you can get inspired, in my opinion, right, is to begin to follow other yoga teachers, or find other people who inspire you, right? So beginning with what you have, and then also, because we are yoga teachers, we have to practice yoga. You have to fill your own cup first, right? So that you then have something to share with others. You can't share when you are feeling empty yourself. Then it feels almost tiring. Maybe you can do it a few times, but over time you start to run out, and your well will run dry. You will really run dry. You will feel like, why am I doing the same thing again? I don't feel inspired. I feel tired. The last one is to surround yourself with people who inspire you. These don't necessarily have to be yoga teachers. They don't necessarily have to be practitioners of yoga. So I have a couple of different friends. I also follow some people on Facebook, on Instagram, whose work I really admire. Maybe they are doing really interesting projects in the field of illustration, in art. Maybe they are doing works with regards to social enterprises. Maybe they are championing for like racial rights and things like this. So just finding what it is that inspires you from other people, like people who will make you feel like, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. Like, this is a new perspective, or this is a new idea, or this is a new direction I had never considered that would be important, not just for me, but also to share with my students and all the people around me, right? And right, so if you're looking also, it is also helpful, for example, if you want to follow other yoga teachers, right? If you, for me, a lot of my inspiration or the bhavanas that I have come up with in my past classes take inspiration from my own experiences practicing with my teachers. So I have one beloved teacher in Singapore, and he's very playful. He's called Bo Shui, right? And he's trained in the Anusara method. So I follow, like, it's been many times of practice with him that I remembered, for example, certain transitions in yoga, so both the sequencing, but also the language, and also the idea or the theme, the feeling that I wanted to convey, right? I actually stole it, they steal it like an artist from him, and then made it my own by changing it, by using it in my own language, by adapting it to my personality, by integrating other elements like, for example, qigong, like somatics, which I have learned, and that made it uniquely mine. So I would recommend, firstly, if you haven't already, have a home practice. Right? If you are struggling to do that, there are a couple of different places that you can watch videos from other great yoga teachers, stream them online, and I'll be able to share them as well inside the newsletter, and you'll be seeing that with the recap for this episode. So you can subscribe to many of these, and I would really recommend the more people you practice with, the wider your well of inspiration, the more you will find you never run out of ideas, you never run out of bhavana. Your bhavana is ever flowing. You are full of love, inspiration, joy, right? And you're like, oh my God, it's never ending. You just keep going. Okay. All right, so I think I've come to the end of today's episode. All right, thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in before we end off. All right, if not, you can also drop me a message later on. I'm also really excited at this weekend, we'll be sharing the Courage and Clarity mentorship. It's a 2-part workshop with 6 weeks of mentorship to help you as a new yoga teacher or yoga teacher trainee tuning in to begin to refine, firstly clarify why you're teaching, right? From why you want to teach, from a deep place of resonance with ahimsa, with satya, with that truthfulness and authenticity. Identify your strengths. What are already your underlying strengths and weaknesses, right? What things that are you really passionate about? And then we'll also be looking to explore various different case studies of successful yoga teachers and how they actually teach. What model do they use, or what language do they use? What is their, how do they relate to students? What is their energy like? And what were their influences? And from then on, that will give you possibly an idea of what path you might want to take. So that will be happening this weekend. If you haven't signed up yet, there are still a few slots remaining. All right, please do check that out. That's in the events page. Rebecca, I can't wait to share that with you, right? And I'm really looking forward to you being there as well. All right, so please have a great day ahead, and I'll see you soon.